I'm Lois Breisman.
I'm Paul Breisman, and we had the privilege of starting Younglife in the Tri-Cities at Kennewick High School in the fall of 1968. We moved here from Michigan to start a church of our denomination, and the denomination sent a pastor from Palo Alto, California. So one night we were sitting around thinking, talking about different ways of evangelism, and he said, have you guys ever heard of Younglife? He said, no, I never heard of it. So he contacted the staff man, Chuck Ferguson in Yakima, and Chuck came down and we got a bunch of people together, and I think it was for one night a week for 4 weeks. He told us all about Younglife and how it operated. And at the end of that 4 weeks, he said, okay, who's going to take the challenge of starting Younglife in the Tri-Cities? I said, well, I will. And so
That meant I came along.
yeah, and so we started with one kid. I knew the heavyweight wrestler in Kennewick High School, and so he started doing contact work. And said every time I'd go to the high school, I said, "Great, introduce me to all your friends," you know. And so then the staff guy from Chuck came down, and we got a bunch of kids together. And at Ray Ord's house, we had about probably 40 kids for the first club meeting, and Chuck introduced me as the new leader for Kennewick High School. And so we started in the first club we had at the ASB president's houses, and I expected a bunch of kids. See, we had 9, and man, what's going on anyway? And so the next week we had 7, and then oh boy, we kept praying, and finally it started building up and wound up, I don't know how many years later, but I threw out the challenge one time of if you guys get 100 kids, I'll eat a live goldfish. And so I had the goldfish there, and sure enough, everybody's counting, 99, 100, and everybody's yelling and cheering, and just said, come on, Breisman, eat that fish. So I reached in the bowl and pulled them out, squeezed the crap out of them. And again, I swallowed that sucker. And anyway, so it grew and grew, and
Not the fish,
not
the club.
The club, yeah.
Okay.
I think every Younglife leader should take this verse out of Samuel in the Bible someplace where King David was dancing in front of all these, after he had a victory thing, and he was dancing in front of all these people, and his wife said, he shouldn't really do that, being a king. He says, but his word within the Living Bible said, but I'm willing to act like a fool to show my joy in the Lord. And I thought, well, that's a great Younglife person's verse to have.
I grew up in Moscow, Idaho, and came to the Lord through the ministry of Younglife. Grew up in a church, but really came to know who Jesus was through that, and at Malibu. And so have always been involved as a kid, and then as leadership in the Palouse area, had good training. Then when I moved to Twin Falls as a teacher, we started club there, and so I've always had a heart for a club. When we moved here in the '84, we knew that we loved Younglife people, and we knew the ministry, and we knew how relevant it was to reach kids, and we wanted that. So we jumped right in. We took a group of kids in '87 to Malibu, and there were 29 kids, I think, at that time, from Richland and Kennewick, and I thought that was a pretty good representation for not having an area director. And we all, it was the '80s, and one of the stories that I like to tell is the late '80s, and so I have a picture of all the girls and their hair, because the '80s was the high hair day, and it was the day of the regatta, and that's where everybody gets wet. They're out in the water, and they have boat races, and they have everything, so you're guaranteed a wet day. It was raining to boot, and the girls were late, and they'd come to camp with tall cans of hairspray, Aquanet, and the girls were late, and we went in to find out what was taking them so long to get down to this activity, and they were in fixing their hair. The smell of the hairspray was enough to start a fire if you'd lit a match, but it was just a fun time. It was a good time with kids.
I started in 1990. It was right after Gary Hopkins got here. And it had been after a year or maybe a year and a half of not having a staff person. I don't know how long it was. Yeah, so 3 or 4 years of no activity. So Gary Hopkins was brand new on staff. Got things going at Kennewick High School. I started getting things going at Kennewick High School, and Hopkins was leading the charge. I mean, he was having 100 kids at club every week. He'd have 50 kids at campaigners. Ministry was growing and blossoming and just going. It was a neat time. You think about what Young Life is now, what Young Life was back then, what Young Life is back 40 years ago. It's the same stuff. It's kids, it's adults, old guys like me, going into a foreign environment, the high school, and reaching out to kids. And that's it's what Young Life is, what Young Life has always been about. So, just a cool ministry, and cool to see how kids respond.